Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are so happy that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Emily Farranto. She is here to talk about Animals Mate, a book about where babies come from. Before Emily joins us, I would love to invite you to visit my website, WeWillRoar.com. We Will Roar. Respect others and read. It is my totally interactive educational magic show, and it has been adapted to be the perfect online experience, live online experience. That's right. I can come right into your classrooms, into your church, into your homes to present my nationally acclaimed educational magic show, We Will Roar, Respect Others and Read. Really is a lot of fun, and you can find out all about it by going to our website, WeWillRoar.com. Joining us right now from the great state of Louisiana, she is the author of a really important book. It's called Animals Mate, a book about where babies come from. Please welcome to the show, Emily Farranto. Emily, how are you?
Hello, I'm fine. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited that you're here. Animals Mate is a picture book. It's from our friends at Familius Publishing. And I think this really could have been a very helpful book when my kids were younger. They're 23 and 26 right now. But there were a number of times when questions about sexuality and where babies come from popped up in our families, and I think having this book would have been great. Tell us about the book and what inspired you to create it, please.
Sure. Well, I am the mother to two boys, and my older son was young when he began asking questions, as I think a lot of children are. I think from just an ask around, I think a lot of parents expected these questions to come later and more formally. So my son had already asked me, how babies were made, and he was at the time, probably when he was about 3, he was precocious and very verbal. Probably when he was about 3, I had told him that the sperm and the egg something called sperm, something called an egg, a man and a woman comes together and makes a baby. I didn't give him the logistics. Mm-hmm. When he was about 5, I remember I was in the car, I was driving him home from school, so he's in the back seat, and he said, well, so how does the sperm get to the egg? And this is the big question. I think this is the big problem spot for a lot of parents, because it deals with a very sensitive subject, and one that you want to present in the right way, and not too soon and not too late. And you don't want to, I didn't want to lie or evade. I wanted to answer his question. At the time though, I said something like, that's a good question and I will answer it for you, but right now I'm in traffic and I need to focus on driving. And, but the timer was running. So as I said, I wanted to be honest. I wanted to be age appropriate. And I think the first thing I did, my son goes to a French immersion school, and on a lot of subjects, Europeans have sort of a different approach. And I knew that I was under the impression that there might be a book or some books that just spoke frankly about the body and included this function. I looked for those books. I couldn't find them for this age group. Then I had this sort of lightning bolt. I said, animals. Of course, there's got to be a book about animals reproducing. And then I can just give him this sort of soft introduction, tell him the facts of how the sperm and the egg come together, but he doesn't have to picture adults or his own body. It sort of externalizes it. And I could not find it. And so what I did was I drew the first illustrations that would become part of this book. And, I left them out in our living room, and the following, and it was within the same period of time. He came home and he saw them and he said, "What are these?" And I said, these are drawings I made. I'm thinking about making a book about reproduction. Do you know what that is? And he said he didn't know. And so I just laid it out very quickly. I just said, reproduction is how living things make more of each other, and sexual reproduction is when there's a man and a woman, or a male and a female. And meanwhile, he's looking at these pictures of animals rather than thinking about, his parents, himself, or the neighbor. He's imagining animals. And then he did say to me, he said, "Well, I'm glad people don't do that." And I said, I was like, "Ooh, I did not foresee that." I said, "Well, they do, but it's when they're adults." Mm-hmm. And as soon as you tell a child something is kind of, as long as it's not in a way that piques their curiosity, it's just sort of part of the wah, 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 boring world of the other atmosphere. I said, the adults, humans do this, but when they're adults, and about instincts kind of kick in and tell them how it works. Yeah. And I waited, and he's like, "Oh, okay. Are you going to publish this book?" And then he started asking me questions about publishing and how books were made, and, our author's famous. And that was it. And it was so easy. And I really felt like I knocked it out of the park. And, as a parent, we don't have many of those moments. We get a lot of 70s on these exams. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that was done. And then he went off to play, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And that's how the book sort of became. I wasn't actually thinking very hard. I wasn't thinking much about a book, but it had crossed my mind, and I felt like that was a way to explain. I mean, I'm an artist who is used to me drawing, but it's not the sort of drawings I was usually doing. So I wanted to use this as an opener. Yeah. And that was it.
Well, I think you did two great things that I really want to kind of highlight, because I think it's important. Number one, when the question came up, you weren't ready to answer it, but you didn't dodge the bullet. You didn't do what probably my parents would have done, which is shut up, don't talk about that. You said, "Hey, that's a good question. I'm not ready to answer it right now but I will answer it for you." And I think that that's really important. Acknowledging that, you might not be ready for the question. At 3, it came. Your son came a little bit earlier than my kids. My kids were right behind him at 4 and 5 years old. So it is important to kind of, not make the kid feel bad that he or she is curious about this, because it's a natural thing to be curious about. And also understand that it's okay to let your kid know that now's not a good time to talk about it, but we will talk about it. So I really appreciate that you did that, and I think that that's important for folks to understand. And I think, and it's not just with sexuality. There's a lot of different questions that we may not be ready to address the moment that the question is answered. But I think, again, it's important to just acknowledge that's a great question. We will talk about it. Give me a chance to breathe and think about it first. So, hats off to you. Did that just come instinctually to you?
Well, I mean, I was literally in traffic, and I remember I was crossing Claiborne Avenue, and you really do have to pay attention, especially in New Orleans. Boston is anywhere. You have to pay attention when you're driving. So it's not. It was. And because, if it was an easier question, like I said, that's the subject of penetration is profound and it's complex, and I really wanted to get it right. If it was, if he asked what we were having for dinner, I might not want to talk about that either, but I might just say, I'll think about it when I get home. Mm-hmm. This one was a little, But yeah, I do practice, like when we're walking to the car, or when we're in, I call it when we're in transitions. If they're trying to tell me a story, and this is still the case, although they're sort of out of the habit of doing this, and I'm focusing on something. I say, I'm focusing on something else. So I do let them know that there's an internal, reality inside my head. And just because I'm not making noise does not mean I'm not doing or thinking or, and that I'm not available to listen. So sometimes I'll say, I can't be a good listener right now. Let's wait till we get home or something like that. But yeah, I also believe if they ask the question, my son had asked this question because he knew about the sperm in the egg. So that information was already out there. And so had I left it hanging indefinitely, or even if I had said, you're not ready to know that answer, or, I'm wondering if his mind would have filled in something that's less than the truth, less healthy than what I could come up with. Mm-hmm. So I did want to put an answer in there, but I wanted to follow him in terms of what he did and didn't want to hear. Mm-hmm. My other son probably wouldn't have asked that question. Mm-hmm. He came across this book, obviously. He was younger, so he actually came across this information via his older brother and via the conversation around this book. But he might not have asked until much later. Mm-hmm. But, if Oscar wanted to know, my son wanted to know how that got in there. I remember when I was little thinking, there were different kind of rumors going around. There was the fact that when people got married, it was like a special kiss. That's not true, and not everyone is married. There are ideal situations. There are less ideal situations. There are abhorrent situations. All of these things bring about life. But if we really respect life, we will leave space for the truth around it. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I went to animals and science, because it wasn't the time for the complexities of human sexuality. And before he asked a friend at school, I wanted to be like, oh, look, animals. Yeah. Nature.
And I think that's a really great way to talk about difficult issues with our kids. I think it's important for us to be honest with our kids. I was never comfortable with the whole, you came from a stork idea.
That's just weird.
It is very weird. The other thing that you brought up that I think is important too for parents to understand is that, don't give your kids too much information. Let them kind of guide you with what they're wanting to know. Sometimes when they don't need to know, they don't want to know all the ins and outs. They have this one question, and a basic answer to them could be all they want at the moment, and that will satisfy them until they come back. They understand that, I can trust my parents. When I ask them a question, they're going to give me the answer. So then they'll come back when they need more information.
Yes, I think that's true. I think that the text to this book is basically the conversation I had with my son. So it's kind of a script, and the tone of it is level, is calm. And what a lot of parents do, maybe in a panic, or maybe that's because what their parents did is, sometimes parents make what I think is the grave mistake of saying, well, your father and I, and that's, the word out there is, that's gross. You don't have to put that in their heads. Mm-hmm. But also what I found about, the difference between using animals as an example and having to sort of talk about humans is, like I said, human sexuality is really complicated. There are also privacy issues. And I, not just in the course of this conversation, it didn't come up in that initial one. But I didn't speak specifically to my children about their parents because that's a boundary. And, I will be very honest, but from an early on, I said, I don't speak about what happens behind my closed doors, but in general. And I think that that's like about respect, and it's like the seeds of respect and privacy, and also, leaving less, to judge about other people if other people are different. So the book is supposed to offer parents who might be a little more squeamish around this thorny topic almost a way of keeping your voice calm while you say, this is how this happens. Mm-hmm. And in the text it says, most animals, including humans, reproduce. Animals mate and reproduce once they are adults. I think those two things are really important because a child needs to know this does not affect you, your body, any more than, they should be more interested in driving a car than sexuality, and their body will tell them when sexuality becomes an issue. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But then in the text of the book, I quickly move on to, hey, look, like sometimes, the book is almost a distraction for parent and child so that the conversation does not have to become some big serious thing. These pictures are supposed to be engaging. And, even years after this was the conversation and this was the way, we still go back to the animal kingdom to discuss things and start with nature. We start, with, my son is now 12 and there's flirtation, and before we get into good, bad behavior at school or, why girls or boys are doing this or that, we go to the animals and we say, yeah, so the animals show off for each other in various ways. And sometimes it's influenced by nature and sometimes it's influenced by media. But this conversation gave us a foundation in nature. And then it does give you that breathing room to figure out the morality, to figure out how to talk about it in society. Because, I think 5 is too young. I don't think they need it at that time. They're,
I think 5 is a little young for those kind of conversations. One of the things that we've talked about a lot here on the show is the fact that tackling some very difficult topics, it's easier by talking about them indirectly through characters and stories in books. If you're talking about the issue of bullying, it's a lot easier to sit down and read a story with your kids that has that theme in it than sitting down and asking the kid, hey, is anybody bullying you at school? And so I think that your strategy in terms of giving parents a comfortable way to address these issues with really young kids is a real winner. And I think that families will be grateful to have this.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. It's worked for us. I approached a publisher finally because I had sort of offered to give friends, drawings if they wanted to just leave the drawings around when they were sensing that their kid was wanting to ask these questions or had asked these questions. So I would like to make it easier for parents, and if this makes it easier, great, And if it helps nurture a kind of openness and, a lot of adults carry around their own backstories, their own histories, reservations, and sometimes trying to, on the spot, bring that vocabulary down to introduce your child to this subject in a way that is soft and non-judgmental and will allow them to come back and ask you more questions. That's really the goal, because I did not want my children learning these things at school or from friends or in the park. Mm-hmm. And if they saw or heard something that made them feel strange, or that was, that they had a question about, I wanted them to be able to come to me. And so the tone on the onset of these conversations to me is the most important thing. To be able to stay as, when children learn that the earth is round, it's kind of a crazy idea. And yet parents don't get all nervous and, complicated when they're trying to explain the earth being round, or that, that humans poop. If you sat a child down and talked about either of those facts as if it were the grave, most grave thing in the world, a child would be hesitant maybe to come back to you. Mm-hmm. So establishing that tone of like, yes, this is normal, this is nature. Come back if you have any more questions. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they don't have questions for a while, because I don't think it sparks there's nothing about this, answering it when they're really young, I think, that will spark a sort of investigative reporter's deep dive into the subject. Yeah. On the contrary, when they're outside and they see an animal behaving in a certain way, they might say, oh, that animal's mating. Yep. And then end of story, end of question. Yeah, so
absolutely. You mentioned that you, at one point after you had the drawings, you decided to approach a publisher. And we know that our friends from Familius are publishing this book. Did you get any resistance from publishers? Were there any publishers who said, no, we're not going to touch this? Or did you just, go right to Familius and hit a home run with them right off the bat?
Well, I had an agent, so she was wonderful. She did all of that hard work, because that is not my expertise. I had published an article in Slate about this subject, and I think that gave it a little bit of credence. I had some interest and also some reservation. From what I understand, publishers are, they want to do something new and original, but they also, it's a business, and they Familius has been wonderful, and they gave me a lot of creative control, which is not always the case. The book is really beautiful. I couldn't have done it on my own. I couldn't have come up with this beautiful product without, the support of Familius, and my agent was wonderful as well. So it took a team, and I really wanted the book not to look like something that you would bury in your child's bookshelf or on your top shelf. I wanted it to be as good looking as a coffee table book. And I mean, art is my background. So these are not, the illustrations are sort of dry. I don't know, somebody else might not use that word, but I wanted to sort of reference dictionary illustrations, again, to keep the tone factual and calm, not cute, not overly graphic, but back to Familius and the process. They were wonderful. I was so excited that they wanted to publish this book, and their focus is family and using books and reading to establish values within a family and even a community. And this book is that. This book is not a book that you will hear at school. This is a really intimate object, a book to be shared between children and the adults they trust. Mm-hmm. So Familius turned out to be a perfect home for this book.
Yeah. Well, we're real excited about it. Where can folks connect with you, find out more about the book, and also find out more about Emily Farranto?
So I do have a website. My website is just my name, emilyfarranto.com, and there are links there's a link to the book there. There are links to the big book selling places, and I would like to put links to some smaller book selling places, but a lot of us still have small local bookstores, and a lot of those small local bookstores have done heroes work during the confinement. So, that would be a great place to look for it. And if they don't have it, I'm sure they could order it. And, once we're all back in the world, I will be doing some events here and there. So my name.com is my website. You could also look it up wherever you're used to buying books.
Excellent. We've had a great time speaking to the author of Animals Mate, a book about where babies come from, Emily Farranto. Emily, thanks so much for being part of the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest would be Amanda Cottrell. She is the author of I Am Empathetic. That is the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, we would love to have you as a guest on the show. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it gives you a chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic children's book. All you need to do is go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the contact button that you'll find at the bottom of the page. Let us know about your great book. We will let you know the next incredibly easy steps. Right now, it's really easy for me to know what to do next, and that is to thank the people who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to thank our guest, Emily Farranto. Be sure to check out Animals Mate, a book about where babies come from. Also want to thank my incredible team, starting with my producer, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my awesome author ambassador, Peggy Cotto. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, but most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.